Aber du sagst mir Bescheid noch. Ne? Welcome everybody to this session. It will be the last one of the 2022 Vienna conference. So after this session and the parallel running sessions, the event is over. We want to give an insight in a man who is not very known in the global society of Vienna, but was very important in Germany. That is the entrepreneur Götz Werner. He was a very influential proponent for the basic income. And we want to give a little bit of an insight how he came up to this idea of universal unconditional basic income from his entrepreneurial experience. That is a difference and that is special. The first part will be that I talk a little bit about Götz Werner's development, also the development of the company and how he came up with his insights on what economy is, what is necessary for a society to go further on. The second part will be that Professor Dr. Bernhard Neumärker will talk about a new order liberalism based on UBI. This was a main question and favorite idea of Götz Werner. Can it be possible that we have a new liberalism and in particular order liberalism based on a UBI? So order liberalism in Germany was important because from that the development went into the social market economy in Germany that was implemented after the Second World War. And this is an idea how it can go further on in shaping the society by a new order liberalism with a UBI. The third part will be conducted by Professor Dr. André Presse, who was a research assistant at the chair of Götz Werner in the University of Karlsruhe. That was in the time from 2003 to 2010, when Götz Werner was head of the Interfaculty Institute of Entrepreneurship at the University of Karlsruhe, and André Presse was PhD student at that chair. So he will then deepen his the insight, how does Götz Werner come to the idea, and in particular his idea and intention to change and move all taxes to a value-added tax. Well, let's begin. Götz Werner was an entrepreneur and one of the most influential proponents of an unconditional basic income in Germany in the years from around 2005 to 2018. Even long before that, he advocated an unconditional basic income, but it was not until the beginning of this century that it gained public interest. He died this year, 2022, on February 8th. What made him so influential was, on the one hand, of course, his social position as a head of a very large company. But more than that, he was inspiring because he was completely authentic. What he said was covered by his person. And because what he said had a spiritual, or let's just say a real human aspect. He did not moralize, but shared insights from experience that logically resulted in an unconditional basic income and its financing through value-added tax. What made him special was that he came to the idea of an unconditional basic income for everybody from entrepreneurial experience. In 1973, he opened his first store. He had painted the walls and laid the floor himself together with his first employee, Helga Weiss, and was curious to see whether customers would come. Customers did come, and they bought so much that the cash registers ran so hot that they started to smoke. They had to be replaced with more efficient ones. It was a drugstore. Götz Werner comes from a family of druggists, but his father didn't want to hear about his ideas. He kicked him out. Now here in his own store, he implemented the discounter principle, which was still quite new at that time. The company, DM Drogeriemarkt, that he built together with the many who work with there, who deliver the goods, who shop there as customer, today has over 2,000 stores and 43,000 employees in Germany alone, is represented in another 12 countries in Southern and Eastern Europe, has an annual turnover of around 12 billion euros and a total of 66,000 employees and around 4,000 stores. Even 14 years ago, Götz Werner could say, every day in Germany, 1 million people come to our stores and experience DM. In 2008, Götz Werner withdrew from operational management and joined the company's supervisory board. What makes the difference of DM Drogeriemarkt? How does Götz Werner's entrepreneurial experience extend beyond the scope of the company to his commitment to an unconditional basic income? As the retail chain grew, as more and more stores were added, Götz Werner realized that he was no longer getting anywhere with instructions and uniform guidelines on how to act in the store. He noted that things will only continue if the employees in the stores act in self-responsible and entrepreneurial manner. After all, they themselves know best what kind of clientele they have, what is in demand in their region, what they need in their branch, how they can best work together. His advisor at that time, Hamilton Seedorf, told him, if you want them to be entrepreneurial, you have to give them the tools you have as an entrepreneur. This is how it was done. An entire hierarchical level of area managers was abolished, branches to power. All employees in the stores have insight into the company's figures. They can compare their sales with those of other stores and exchange advice with each other. They have insight into the salary levels of all employees in their branch as well as in other. They can independently commission a craftsman if something needs to be repaired in the store. They can decide for themselves whether to employ anyone else in the store and have a say in what their product range is like. Within a certain frame, they can decide and carry out many things at their own discretion. All services provided to them by the corporate headquarters are billed to their branch. This has no influence on their income, but they can see how much value is being created for them in other departments of the group, and they can decide to use less of it. This increases anyone's awareness of services rendered and claimed by others, and it more quickly shows up the pay of internal settlements. So it's not just nice slogans like employees are our capital, people are our focus. Instead, they take this seriously. And this is not inconsistent with business improvement. On the contrary, human being is at the center. Well, no, Götz Werner says, the human being is a goal. Being human is not a state, but a process of development. The human being is not a means, but an end. Human being and its development is a purpose of all our efforts. The human is not the means for the functioning of the company or whatever else. It is ongoing about the becoming human. For this, everything else is a means. That's how Götz Werner sees it. Quote, an enterprise is a social, artistic, cultural event. The company is a platform for biographies. Götz Werner saw it this way. Work serves to develop skills. An income is needed by everybody to be able to work. You need an income to be able to buy what others do for you. First, you need an income, then you can take part in society, and then show what you can. In a society based on the division of labor, no one can provide for themselves anymore. To live, you need an income, then you can start working. The company is a platform for developing and contributing one's own abilities to others, is giving the space to discover one's own talents and unfold them, enabling people to find and shape their lives, to put one's actions in a meaningful context with what others need. Income is a prerequisite, Work can't be paid. Work can only be made possible. Payments are always directed into future. These insights were the results of his entrepreneurial activity, not detached ideals. His leadership principle was suction instead of pressure, in German Sog statt Druck, creating conditions, opening spaces that interest others, where they want to get involved in, what they see as a task, a goal they want to connect with, a challenge for themselves in which they see meaning. Quote, here I am a human being, here I get in. Quote, leadership is only legitimate if it is leadership for the self-leadership of the other. Otherwise, leadership is manipulation and prevents the other person. The apprentices in the company are called learners because they learn themselves. They can figure out for themselves how to do the job best in their own way. They can try things out and make mistakes. Quote, leading today can only mean leading consciousness. And consciousness is led with questions, not with answers, but by evoking questions. Not by giving directives, but by awakening initiative. In the initiative, human appears as I, human. Quote, I'm not a director, I'm an evoker. With answers, the inner self falls asleep. With questions, the inner self wakes up. With questions, it becomes active. With answers, you are satisfied and does not think for yourself. Trust is good, control is better. Lenin is said to have said this sentence, quote Götz Werner, when you look at this statement in the light, it can only mean trust for me, control for you. How do we want to establish a community, a development community where people find their path in life if you say trust for me, control for you? Impossible. Don't we live by giving trust to the other? Trust is good, control is better. Many see it that way. Götz Werner also started out that way. But the bigger the company, the more elaborate and impossible the control becomes. And people never become self-reliant that way. Confidence ennobles man, eternal guardianship inhabits his maturation. So Baron von Stein said, and that's what Götz Werner said. Is a human being a stimulus-response creature? No, Götz Werner said, he's a developing being. A giraffe dies as the giraffe it was born as. A human being evolves in his life and changes. Everyone is an entrepreneur, Götz Werner proclaimed, insofar as everyone undertakes his or her life, shapes his life. And Götz Werner liked to add, believe me, this undertaking is guaranteed to end badly. It was important to Götz Werner to see the other person as a human being, just as he is himself, and to concede to the other person what he conceded to himself. If division of labor, then collaboration. If collaboration, then everyone is equally important to achieving the common goal, then equal eye level. The now-how, the now-why was more important to Götz Werner than the now-how. Of course, you need know-how, but more important is to know why. This is a question of meaning. Why do we sell toothpaste? This question was a theme in a seminar for which the management of the Drogeriemarkt had to write something. They thought up the most amazing things. On the last day of the seminar, Götz Werner came in, saw the fancy stuff they had written and said, well, you're selling toothpaste because that's all I learned. That became idealistic and moral. Götz Werner broke that by saying something very simple, practical. But if you ask him a question for which you expected a simple, practical, and functionally business answer, you would get an answer from him that opened up a space of humanity and awareness that went far beyond the expected. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Taken seriously everywhere in life were guiding stars for him. Everything that was done was measured according to these, whereby the way there is not always a straight way. Freedom, equality, basic income. If you don't have a dream, you don't have a future, Götz Werner stated. That applies to society as well as for your own lives. Götz Werner's entrepreneurial attitude was to give confidence to the other. As a result, many in the company have risen above themselves, but sometimes that has gone wrong. People were trusted who used this in a negative way and proved to be destructive for the company. They were then dismissed, but that didn't stop Götz Werner from giving confidence always again, because the main point was not that this always produced positive results, but that this is a way to deal with people, because people are developmental beings, and that means in their very own and perhaps not at all pleasing way, different than me, but equal with me as a human being. This was not superficially about morality, not a nice ideology, or a means to the end of commercial success, but about cognition. Cognition of the human being. The human being is not the means, but the end of the undertakings. Income enables work. Work is human development. Working time is time of your life and not an antithesis of life. Quote, the economy has a task to freeing people from labor, freeing them for their work, for their meaningful activity. In the world based on the division of labor, in external supply, we always work for others, not for ourselves, and trust that others will work for us. We live from the initiative of others. So it's only good for me if as many others as possible can take action, can take the initiative. Initiative enhancing framework. That was what Götz Werner was all about in the company, but that's just as true for society as a whole. The fact that Götz Werner was in favor for an unconditional basic income is no kindness. It is not the benevolence of a rich company owner who wants to do something good in the evening of his life. It is only a consequence of his findings. Among these findings was that the price for something, for a good, a product, a service, dissolves completely into income once you follow the path that money takes from paying a price. It is not the thing, the refrigerator, the bus ticket, the potato that takes the money, needs the money, that costs money, but what it costs are income shares of all those who have contributed to the creation and provision of the product or service. This includes income shares of those employed or contracted by the public sector, by the state, who contribute to the circumstances and conditions under which it is possible in the private sector to produce and make services and goods available. For their income, public sector, the taxes are levied, and these are also paid for in prices of a product or service ultimately by the end customer, the consumer. The money that pays the taxes and charges, whether as income tax or profit tax or any other tax, comes out of what consumers pay as the price of the final product. It comes from what consumers spend. The consumer bears the tax even if it is later deducted from earned income or business profits or levied on specific goods. In the price, the consumer bears a share that goes to the state as tax. These are discoveries of Götz Werner, not intentions. The intention is to make this known and to draw the consequences. Unconditional basic income because it frees up people's initiative, enabling the creative power of work. In the initiative, the human being appears as an I am, an entity that develops and recognizes itself. Changing all taxes to a tax that is not only borne in prices but also levied there, the value-added tax, so that the creative power of capital is not hindered. Capital here meant as a force configuring the cooperation and interaction of all components of the company, which is expressed in equity. Equity, Eigenkapital in German, is, according to Götz Werner, the figure on the balance sheet that indicates entrepreneurial productivity, the creative power. With the consumption tax, this creative power remains unhindered. Consumption tax means it is not the service provider who pays the tax, but the service recipient. Value-added tax and unconditional basic income were the two sides of a medal that Götz Werner saw as progress, and the two fit together. The basic income is levied as a tax component in prices. Even before that, everyone's basic income was a share in the price, because, as I already said, spending money for a price is paying the income of others, including the basic income component in all earned income in both the private and public sectors and the existing state transfer income. With the introduction of a UBI, the basic income amount for all is in the price as well, but as a tax share. The basic income amount levied as tax and transferred separately as UBI may disappear in all other transfer income and earned income. The latter will be a matter of negotiation in the labor market. To the extent that the basic income portion disappears in other income, the basic income tax does not rise prices. The point is that the basic income should become unconditional. It is already financed, emphasized Götz Werner, because we have enough services and goods for everybody, and we could produce even more. Götz Werner was not concerned with this for merely moral reasons, but out of insight into the necessity of these measures for the progress of people and mankind. Well, so far my contribution. I think we have some minutes now for questions from the audience, if there are some. Well, so far I don't see any questions, and I think then we can go further on with the presentation of Professor Dr. Bernhard Neumärker, head of the Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies and professor at the Götz Werner Professorship at the University of Karlsruhe, who is, well, in a way, given and donated, if you want to say so, by Götz Werner for researching on specific points on the UBI. Professor Neumärker, I would like to give you the word.
So, thank you very much. Enno, a perfect introduction, I would say, to Götz Werner's thoughts on UBI, and you will see that at least some of them are now also integrated into New Order liberalism, but not because Götz Werner said, okay, I will sponsor the GVP as well as freebies with some money to do research on UBI, but because it was as a surprise an outcome of our research that UBI and the ideas of Götz Werner are so much stabilized, even when you study them more or less with poor or more broad economics analysis. Yeah, and therefore I want to introduce into a little bit more into something what Götz Werner mentioned when he said Freiburg, University of Freiburg, not University of Karlsruhe. University of Freiburg is a perfect place. He had some arguments on it. First, he said, okay, Freiburg is at heart of the so-called German order liberalism, who played a very important role in the development of the famous German social market economy, a pure success story after the Second World War. Yeah. And he was very interested in that order liberalism because the one basic idea is freedom regulated only by constitutional rules. And he thought that this is a good framework for basic income. If these rules are formal constitutional rules or only rules followed by and controlled by a government is a different thing. But he said ordoliberalism sets a good frame for the economy, and he believed that a very well developed and scientific ordoliberalism could also support UBI, and therefore it was the question to investigate in this. On the other hand, I have to say that freebiz is clearly an interdisciplinary research agenda. Yes, we have other sciences than economics in freebiz: theology, anthropology, psychology, social robotics and digitalization, and so on and so forth. But the intriguing thing was that the old-fashioned German ordoliberalism under the famous Walter Eucken was an ordoliberalism, and the group of ordoliberalism was an interdisciplinary group with researchers from law, mathematics, language, and so on and so forth. The second intriguing argument for Götz Werner's proposal that in Freiburg we should investigate in UBI from an ordoliberalistic point of view was that his friend and advisor, especially tax advisor Benedictus Hardorp, was a promoter of financing UBI by the value-added tax, as Enno Schmidt reported. And he received his PhD from the economics department at the University of Freiburg at the end of the 1950s. So therefore, he was also familiar with the basic framework of the traditional ordoliberalism. And the support was then from Götz Werner and from his foundation for developing a more modern scientific version of ordoliberalism, which can test relevance, level, and financing options, as well as all the potential effects of UBI. So, and the results or the approaches based on Götz Werner's beliefs, arguments, and so on were really spectacular. We had many meetings before we started the Götz Werner chair, which has grown out of my regular chair, yes, as an upgrade. And the Freiburg Institute of Basic Income Study, we had many meetings and bilateral discussions. And for example, Götz Werner said, quote, how to make UBI as a basic social rule for modern societies acceptable even for rich and special interested persons who usually would argue that they oppose UBI. Yeah, for seeing what is a good neutral argumentation of persons who should be biased towards their own position. A good solution and a good investigation strategy to handle this is the ex-ante social contracting approach, especially our experiments in the lab. I will give a short introduction to it. That's a part of new ordoliberalism. Besides that, Götz Werner also asked, what are useful impulses? I said criteria and effects for making a UBI society in a stable way more cooperative for care work. That was also very interesting because, sorry, there is someone not unmuted. Please mute. There are what he calls impulses is what we might call in science criteria and effects, yeah, for more cooperative, stable society. And therefore, I applied ex post stable social contracting rules, yes, to investigate that question. Third, Götz Werner said, what UBI level is really necessary for a society, yes, with real free people. Therefore, out of some liberty and freedom arguments of researchers, I developed an approach which suits some of the arguments of UBI and especially of Philippe van Parijs' real freedom. Fourth, Götz Werner asked me, do we always need complex and ex ante? Ex ante, you see in brackets, is my add to it, optimized, but my add ex post, failing social systems when we could implement such a simple and robust idea, and by that he meant the UBI. So my argument for this is a special governance structure, which I call, in accordance to the famous Nobel laureate Williamson, ex post governance, which is based on the idea that robust systems and simple systems are very robust if you organize governance for unforeseen contingencies and not on statistics based on ex ante uncertainty. This means statistical measures. Ex post governance needs simple systems. You will see it. Fifth and last, he also argued on paradigm shifts, which he always called, we need new thinking and we need new ideas based on another direction and logic of thinking. And therefore, I remember that he said this in my enterprise, and that's related to Enno's arguments and presentation. I learned that I have to delegate and decentralize management power towards every worker so that he identifies potential of his self-determination, his creativity, and his innovation, his innovativeness, which he may bring into the firm, yes, as, so to speak, a nearby owner of the firm. I understood that this supported all stakeholders of DM, that's Drogeriemarkt, that's his enterprise, due to mutual confidence. Yes, confidence, as Enno said, is at heart of Götz Werner's idea. And you will see there are some arguments in the new thinking which we can implement even in old-fashioned models, where we have then some power balancing, implying more cooperation and more mutual confidence. And for that, we have to strengthen the power of workers, yes, compared to capital owners and landlords. You will see my argument later. And the next and the last quote, which is also a part of that, what is the potential of self-determined, now my interpretation, time sovereignty criterion, and intrinsically motivated? I do not know what he said exactly. He said motivated by the own will, not by money. This implies then in the end voluntary work, unpaid or paid work, for societal results. Here it was important for him the potential of UBI for the development of the society. And this is, from my point of view, the most important and most crucial problem of new ordoliberalism and for UBI investigations and UBI research, to deal with. Not only can it be financed, will individuals become lazy? What drives the society concerning creativity and concerning innovations? Yes, this means new and additional potential, when they become self-determined and, for example, whenever they are more healthy. What will they do? And for example, one argument of Götz Werner was also they will become more productive inside the labor market and outside the labor market. So therefore, this is a potential for the society. And how to recapitulate this in a framework of new ordoliberalism was also a challenge for myself. So first to the ex-ante argument. Here I developed a social contractarian approach, and this social contractarian approach is based on the ex-ante social contractarian approach of Rawls, Harshani, Buchanan, and many others who said that we have to develop ex-ante fair rules. That's a traditional social contract approach, for example, applied to intergenerational justice. And this contract has its merits. You will see it in a few minutes, but he has one problem because he assumes or he requires as a norm, yes, in that way he's normative, the compliance assumption. This means the confidence assumption, not endogenously developed, given as an assumption. You have to, that's normative, you have to comply to the contract. If you do not comply to the contract, if you breach the contract, then this is a bad thing. This argument never satisfied me, for example, because the society may decide unanimously, we will breach the contract. Then who will enforce the contract? No one. So therefore, the society and the decision makers on the contract will reflect how to make the contract renegotiation proof, self-enforcing, ex post just, and so on, so that it will be a stable contract. And you will see my arguments will be that a social contract with integrating UBI will become, first ex ante implementable. The individuals would like to see UBI as a constitutional, as a social contractarian rule. And second, they have to, from the ex ante point of view, think about if it is not only ex ante just, you will see how ex ante justice works, but if it will be also stabilized from an ex post justice point of view, which might be different. That's, for example, the problem we have with the competition rule in our society. If the deciders in the contractarian stage decide competition is the best, we have to regulate down monopolies. And in the ex post justice check, the individuals do not blame or do not sanction monopolies, because they say, if I would be a monopolist, I would behave as the monopolist we see in our society. Therefore, I will not sanction, I will not shift blame on him, I'm not envious to him. And if all the individuals think in that way, then competition as the ex ante fair rule is breached by the ex post justice check. It's not stable. And therefore, you see, it's also not renegotiation proof. But is UBI, for example, renegotiation proof? I will take care about one argument, for example, is UBI, and it's also an after contract important thing, strategy proof. Strategy proof means individuals behave strategically. They misrepresent what is the best for them to influence other individuals in a manipulative way, so that they end up in their best position. So if anyone behaves strategically, then they misrepresent who they are, what they would like to do, and what could be the best basic income. And this means, in the end, many know this, many economists know this argument, that truth-telling and trustfulness towards other citizens is the best to have a rule becoming strategy proof. Then we have the governance constraint, the idea if UBI could be a self-enforcing constraint. I will be short on this. And these three aspects here define what I call social sustainability. This means a durable UBI constitution, a durable and stable and social contract which gives the state the capacity that he can enforce UBI, for example, and finance UBI in a rightful way, but does not strategically by himself manipulates UBI to win the next vote, for example. So therefore, you see this additional criteria, which I integrated towards a new ordoliberalism in the old ordoliberalism social contracting approach, is elementary. So, to be short with the ex-ante contracting, so why could an entrepreneur also decide neutrally on is UBI a good rule for society or not? And the argument is put him behind the wheel of uncertainty or wheel of ignorance, how Rawls titled it, or my version is wheel of the unforeseen, so that he becomes impartial. For example, with Rawls, we simulate in the lab that no one, if in reality he is rich or poor, doesn't matter, that no one in the lab, in the simulation of the ex-ante fair social contract, does not know if as a consequence of this contract he will become rich, poor, middle class, or whatever. So he has no asymmetric and unfair decision power, and therefore the end is Rawls, Habermas, and many others showed we can explore and define by the outcome of such an experiment just principles. And it was very interesting to see when we compared UBI with many other principles, for example, maximizing the average income, which is maximizing growth, or maximizing the minimum position, which is maximizing the worst of position in terms of income. That's Rawls, that UBI always succeeded in these experiments. They look like this. You do not know who will end up in high, medium, low, or low income. But you know that you will end up in one of these 5 positions after your constitutional decision-making, which you have to organize unanimously so that no one is excluded from the decision, and that, that no one has the feeling that the decision might hurt him, That's Buchanan's argument of the relevance of optimality. So we optimize only on the ordoliberal stage, on the stage of social contracting, never as mainstream economists are doing it in the post-constitutional stage. This is completely irrelevant. And it was so interesting when we asked the decision makers in our experiments, more often students, but sometimes also other citizens, what scheme would you like to choose? They always decided on scheme 2 or 3. This means on a basic income. This means with a certain basic income, 13,000 euro or 40,000 euro, not with the highest floor for the worst of individual, that is Rawls, and not for maximizing the total income. This means maximizing the average. And the arguments for that, which were discussed in the chat, were very clear. So the individual said, we would like to play the market game, the competition game, only if we have a basic income insurance against bad situations, for example, to become poor in the market game. So insure us in a fundamental way in the market game. And when we added arguments on digitalization, then the idea of the UBI amount really increased, because they said we also have to insure with basic income the rich ones, because they can also fail, because they might be substituted by artificial intelligence or by robots. So the basic argument was basic income first. This means justice first, and then as a restriction, efficiency. This means organized competition and income growth, or social GDP growth only if we live in a system with basic income. And you see here, that's the first paradigm change. Social market economy means now justice first by basic income first. Instead of that, what we are doing at the moment, by maximizing growth, by this paradigm, this always means a potential Pareto efficiency first. So the paradigm change from efficiency first to justice first. That was for me a very important result. Second, ex post stable social contracting, also very interesting. Yeah, because, oops, what is that? Okay, because we could show in a paper by Clem Davis and others from the Götz Werner chair, when we have a prisoner's dilemma game, and some of you will know in the prisoner's dilemma, we have a free rider behavior. No one would like to cooperate if we have a certain kindness function. This means that's from Raven, behavioral economics, that you would like to cooperate if you believe, if you have confidence in others, yeah, that they also cooperate, and if you are against them, if you sanction them, yeah, if you punish them, if they will defect, yeah, even if it does not pay for you, if you punish them, that's a behavioral term, then players are conditionally cooperative, but with multiple equilibria. Sometimes they decide for defection, sometimes they decide for cooperation. Yeah, and this is a better result than the original prisoner's dilemma, but cooperation does not always take place. In this model, we could show that if we pay for every player in the symmetric game shown here, or also in an asymmetric game, yeah, a UBI of 0.75, that's only a numerical example, then the individuals, all participants will move to the cooperative solution, all participants. And the insight is, if you have asymmetric players in that game, you have to take care who is the guy who has the lowest kindness function. Yes, if alpha, the kindness level might be 1 or 2, the person who has 1 is the weakest link. So we have to pay UBI to help the weakest link. But the better one who would cooperate earlier also receives it. Why? Because in the social contract, we do not know who will become the person with the low level or who would like to become the person with the high level. So therefore, in the end, it's interesting. UBI gives us not only conditional cooperation, but full cooperation, for example, for the care economy, which leads to a strategy-proof, stable social contract, solving social sustainability and not only ex-ante fair, an ex-ante fair order. My last argument, or one of my last argument is that, and you will see it better here, that a UBI helps in excluding worthless liberty. Worthless liberty means that, for example, neoliberals give it very often. You are free, but you don't have the money to exercise your liberty. And the argument why neoliberals did that was a very clever argument from Milton Friedman. He was in 1962 far ahead of others in arguing the problem of UBI will be that mainstream persons do not believe that individuals do not become lazy, and they do not believe that we can finance UBI. So therefore, he argued we open a poverty gap. By that way, it's clear for neoliberals also that these persons, if they are unemployed, have to work. They will not become lazy. And second, we implement a negative income tax, because the budget of a negative income tax, it's a netto transfer system, is the cheapest budget which we can imagine. Cheaper than a cross budget with you pay basic income to everyone, and it has to be financed by a consumption tax. But with that, you move into the libertarian trap. You should exclude NIT systems just like that, to give the individuals real freedom. So, okay, I have to go to some slides at the end because they refer very heavily to Götz Werner, and that's the argument of a paradigm shift. Götz Werner argued, as I said, I would like to delegate and decentralize management power that everyone in my enterprise can exercise some self-determined management power, so to speak. For that, you have to move away from that, what we know in mainstream economics, which is called the paternalistic capitalism, towards a well-balanced market capitalism, yes, which is utopia, but which is against the status quo biased power seeking of paternalistic capitalism. And that's what we have shown yesterday in Götz Werner and myself in our model, where we called we all are trained in additive separable utility functions in our heads. Consumption is good and paid work is bad. Yes, disutility of effort. Therefore, paid work has to be paid to be compensated. We are trained in this, and furthermore, this is based on hierarchical principal agent contract thinking, that the capital owner, yes, regulates the worker in a principal agent contract so that he works. Yeah, he has to take into account the exit option, which in our means-tested system is very weak. Yeah, so therefore he can exploit by the principal agent workers contract the worker, and he has to take care that he produces profits for the entrepreneur. That's incentive compatibility of the worker with the entrepreneur. Yeah. So the power argument is the worker works for the interest of the entrepreneur in the enterprise, not for his own interest. That's very important to see, and for that he will become compensated. Now the problem is, or the nice thing of UBI is that the exit option will become a bilateral relevance when the exit option financed by UBI will be a participatory UBI, where the worker can say, okay, I exit, I will not be exploited in your firm, yeah, because I can exit very fastly, I am unemployed and I can consume UBI. So this means he can bargain, he has bargaining power with the capital owner and can say, what is your exit option? Yeah. So, and I participate in your enterprise only if you give me some profits, some of your profits, so the incentive compatibility constraint is not so strong, yeah, that I participate really self-determined in your enterprise. And this increases my wage, yeah. So we have a bilateral application of exit option, not only in the direction of exploiting the worker, and we have bilateral relevance of the incentive compatibility constraint. This means there is also a trustful regulation of the worker towards the capital owner. And you see the problem with UBI is here that the capital owner and many owners see that UBI regulates down their contracting power. Yeah, and that's the problem which we have to solve when we implement UBI. But modern and new ordoliberalism regulates principal agent contracts towards bilateral exit options and towards bilateral relevance of incentive compatibility. And this clearly gives workers, this means persons without any capital, more power in firms, enterprises, and all institutions which we have in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, let's have a look to questions from the audience. I see no question. Well, if there are no questions, I suggest that André Presse, that you go further on, and maybe we have a little time then at the very end, maybe also to look to those slides, Mr. Neumärker, you didn't talk about. They look very interesting too. But now, André, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Also to you, Enno and Bernhard, it was really impressive presentations. Let me see if I can properly share my slides. Enno, are you or is anyone doing this for me, or are my slides? Let me check if they are showing at the moment. I have to open Chrome for this. Yeah, so yeah. I think, okay, so maybe I can just, there is one thing that I don't see the slide very large, and I don't know really how to enlarge it, but well, here it says enlarge, maybe this is, and but I know how it looks like anyway. So yeah, I'm kind of trying to start with connecting a little bit by what Enno and Bernhard said. When I first met Götz Werner, I sat next to him at the institute that you both mentioned, and he proposed the idea of a universal basic income, and I responded to him that people would stop working and it can't be financed. So I understand everybody who has this, from my today's perspective, prejudice, and I think one of the main unfortunate consequences of the fact that the institute in Karlsruhe had not continued was that we didn't have the time over the last 10 years to kind of help people outrule these two main prejudices, which I believe still exist today. Any moment I talk to anyone, these are the two arguments that come up. So we are kind of still in the middle, or maybe even at the very early beginnings of I don't know the English word Aufklärungskampagne, a kind of enlightenment campaign for ruling out the universal prejudices against a universal basic income. There are also unfortunately massive prejudices about the basic income from the scientific side. The most important ones already mentioned by Bernhard. And I remember us talking at the Institute a few weeks ago when you mentioned that basically, as I also learned it with Götz Werner, the basic income is balancing off the negative consequences of the value-added tax. The value-added tax is usually considered regressive because it's considered that low people consume higher amounts of their income. Still, combining VAT and the universal basic income yields a progressive tax, which it seems, if I understood you well, that mainstream colleagues do not, even the sympathetic ones, those sympathetic to the basic income, are not able to see. So there would have been much to do. There is still a lot to do. So I'm looking forward to contribute as much as I can on this pathway. So what I would like to do today is just to share my own path, because after working with Götz Werner for 2 or 3 years, I was able to rule out my basic prejudices. And then the question for me was, at a time where I was giving on average 1 speech per week about the basic income, how can I present within 20 or 30 minutes? We'll need much less today. The idea in a comprehensive way. Just since the presentation is titled "How Götz Werner Came to the Subject," also connecting to what you both mentioned earlier, he said basically the anecdote actually it happened, but it's anecdotal evidence. So Götz Werner had very early on understood what's actually coming on the next slide. There I will elaborate a little further, but understood very early on that what you both said, that we work for each other today. So in other words, also our taxation system today is purely value-added based or consumption based. In other words, also the the taxes that we think we pay as income taxes, we pay only in a regular employment, we pay only from the money that customers pay to the company, and then the company pays to us. So all our taxation system today in labor division is consumption based. And this was clear to Götz Werner very early on, probably in the 80s, since he collaborated with Benedictus Hardop. And so what they did when the Iron Curtain fell in the early 90s, very late 80s, early 90s, then they were trying to convince the newly free, liberated Eastern European states to not repeat the mistake of having an income-based tax system, but they wanted to convince them to have a more consumption-based tax system. So they were kind of traveling around, and I remember this one anecdote that Götz Werner mentioned, that they were sitting, I think it was the airport in Budapest, they were waiting on for their plane. And then they were talking about, how this tax would work, and that it, they came also to the point of its progressivity or regressivity, and how to realize what we know today still, and what was known then as a tax-exempt amount for the income tax. And this is when. That's at least how he explained it. This is when the idea of the basic income first sparked in Götz Werner. And then what ensued was even conferences on the consumption tax, book that I also was very happy to see again at the Institute, that we worked heavily when I did my PhD with Götz Werner. So coming to the basics of his considerations after this anecdotal biographic evidence of him, whenever I gave or still sometimes give lectures and speeches about this, so the starting point, or as Benedictus Hardop would in a lovely way frame, Ausgangserkenntnis. So the starting recognition is what has changed over the last, say, 200 years in the way our economy works. Like 200 years ago, Britain was a little further ahead, but Germany still was at the very early beginning of industrialization, and most other states also. So basically, we were living in economies of sustenance, as a thumb rule, 90% of the population in agriculture, and the rest was aristocracy, clerics, some craftsmen, but basically it was 90% in agriculture. And if we look at the figure of the percentage of the people who live and work in agriculture today, we see that it is in the low one-digit field, so 1 or 2 or 3%, depending on which economy you are, in particular in the advanced economies, more industrially more advanced economies. So this has dramatically changed, and of course we were talking a lot about it. We are still talking about it. Still, yet many people have not. That's my experience, and I have to remind myself of this. Many people have not reflected this fact. So I think what Enno said very early on, that we work for others and others work for us, is reflected in this, because if you ask people, then they say, well, I work for my income. And this is a twist of realities, as I learned under Götz Werner's kind supervision. So I was asking myself how to, enable people to put away this. Bernhard mentioned something earlier that I remember from my business ethics class and economic ethics class, the wheel of ignorance, so to say. So if we take away this wheel of ignorance and try to have a first clear view on the reality as it is, and I found this graph to be most inspirational for this. So this graph shows this epochal change, so to speak, and therefore also what we still need to do today, the paradigm shift and paradigm change from sustenance to labor division. And this graph makes it more clear by depicting the market volume and its development over the last 200 years. You could also use the 80 or 90% people who lived in agriculture, but then you have a different curve, and people find this less intuitive. That's what I found in many years of giving speeches about it. So this graph is it's a very generic one. So of course we had sometimes the market volume dropped when we had wars and other crises, but this is kind of the average growth of the market volume of the last 200 years, reflecting the very fact that as we work for each other, we exchange goods and services. And when we exchange goods and services, we do this in markets. So this is why the market volume has been dramatically increasing over the last 200 years. So this graph is there to sometimes we say a picture says more than 1,000 words. So this picture helps us to understand the dramatic, the epochal shift, so the Zeitenwende over 200 years. That provides the basis for talking about the basic income. If Germany and other economies would still be economies of sustenance, we probably wouldn't be sitting here, but rather extracting fruits from the soil or from trees, and the basic income would not be timely. Today it is, because of what this graph represents. So if I can now move on to the next slide. I don't know if you see the shift. Ideally, you see the next slide, which basically at the first glance represents. So there are 2 or 3 slides with which I usually show this connection. So if you take a first look at this slide, then what we see looks like the regular value chain, so to speak. And from a certain perspective it is, but there is much more to it. The beginning of this much more I wrote in the text underneath. So in very generic terms, we can say whatever we do economically starts from nature. Sometimes when I gave speeches, people raised their hand and said, well, but what's with services? There's no nature at the beginning. And then I used to ask back, have you ever received a service from somebody who didn't eat before? So nature is always the starting point. And reflecting on what Götz Werner's favorite philosopher said 100 years ago, that is basically the application. So kind of value one is created by applying labor on nature. So that creates our economic goods, for instance. If you harvest an apple and carry that to the marketplace to sell it, that is kind of, without thinking much about it, this is what his favorite philosopher Rudolf Steiner and also Götz Werner would call value one. So the fact that the market is on, the apple is on the market is kind of value one. But then immediately, since we are human beings, even before we do that, we start thinking and say to ourselves, well, maybe it doesn't make too much sense to carry just one apple to the market. So we use baskets, we use trolleys, we use trucks, and then all the other economy evolves. And that basically constitutes value two, or as we would say in mainstream contemporary terms, productivity. And that emerges when we apply our creativity to the labor that we do. So value one is applying labor to nature, and value two is applying creativity or spirit, Geist, what was the traditional term, to labor. So this is what we see here. We see many links. Actually, here we see only 3, I believe, links in the value chain. And we can say that the goods and services that all of us produce in our economy kind of have a stream from nature, based on nature, well, through the sphere of the production sphere into the consumption sphere. So we have a kind of a value stream, or the German word would be Wertbildungsstrom, so to say. The value is added up. That's the main feature here. The value adds up in each of the links of the value chain. and moves into the consumption sphere. So systematically, you and I, all of us as individuals, are represented twice in this picture. First of all, we are members in the production sphere, whatever we do. If we are in education, we are educating the children of the truck drivers or of the engineers, or the engineers themselves. So we are all here in the production sphere and also at the same time in the consumption sphere. In our property as consumers, we are the target of the entire economic production, which I sometimes like to call the universal incidence, because we have this long debate of whether taxes can be rolled forward to or not to customers. But the underlying basic incidence is that all costs of value creation are carried rightfully by us as consumers. And why rightfully? Because we are the sole purpose of this production. What I always liked, I'm not sure if it comes, no, it's not on the next slide. The next slide is for VAT. Then sometimes, depending on the audience that I used to have, I kind of was saying on the audio stream that consumption, so what's the purpose of consumption? Because we working with Götz Werner, we never, said la pour la, so it's not consumption for the purpose of consumption, but as Enno and Bernhard mentioned earlier, consumption provides the economic base for our cultural and spiritual development. So this is really what value creation is all about, to provide the material base for our cultural and spiritual development of us as individuals and therefore for society in general. So while the value creation takes place from left to right in very generic terms, the goods and services are kind of paid for by the counter stream, the Wertabrechnungsstrom, so the value accounting stream, so to speak. And this brings us now to some of the things, some of the sentences below this graph. So the first thing that we can learn is that nature itself is for free. 1 ton coal and oil costs nothing because it's in the ground, right? So where costs start is when we have to pay for the labor to extract and make it available. Or as Götz Werner loved to say, God doesn't send a bill, neither for the rain nor for the sun. So, of course, if we need to renaturate, etc., this costs money, but nature basically is there for free. And so that's the first thing. The second aspect is here you see when the production sphere merges into the consumption sphere, on the right-hand side of the picture, there is the price. And the price dissolves entirely into private incomes. And this is also, for me today, straightforward. I remember when I first thought about it and learned about it, I was critical. But today, I think I know it's actually true. Also, when you pay interest to a bank, this becomes private income, either of the employees of the bank or to capital owners who receive interest on their deposited money. So this price 100% dissolves into private income of the person who is waiting, who is the waiter in the restaurant, or the person at the cash desk at the grocery store, or the owners of the apple tree from which we harvest the apple. So that entirely dissolves into private income. And therefore, the consequence of this is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, all costs of value creation are part of the price, as is the case for taxation. So also taxation are, whether it's income taxation or value-added tax, is part of the price. So what we suggested and what I kind of wrote my PhD about, so Milton Friedman promoted and proposed the negative income tax in 1962. I think, Bernhard, you mentioned his works. I think it was called Capitalism and Freedom. And we kind of published our idea of the negative consumption tax in 2009 as in my PhD thesis. And so that brings us to the next slide. If all taxes are contained in the price, then since we have a democratic society, we want transparency, then let's make that transparent and introduce or increase the value-added tax to an extent that actually we do not, that was our, and from a certain point of view still is at least in that line of thought, the ideal case, until the value-added tax replaces all other taxes. In the light of our contemporary tax system, this sounds a little bit utopic, but the more you think about it, the less utopic it becomes, because if you start to think about it, then you can start recognizing that also our income taxes, as I mentioned earlier today, are paid only consumption-based, based on the consumption of our customers. So what we promoted or still promote today more in theory than in practice, at least myself, is that all taxes are contained in the price, and therefore if we make this transparent with a value-added tax, then ideally in 30 years or so we have no other, for instance, no income tax, we have no income tax evasions, etc. And then we came back to Götz Werner's initial thought and said, well, but if there is no other tax and if there is only the consumption tax, how do we make sure that the minimum consumption is tax exempt? And if you take for a moment the example that we used to take, let's say the minimum consumption is around 1,000 euros for reasons of simplicity. And if we know that's the status quo today, because we have a state or government quota or Staatsquota of 50%, we know that basically half of our prices are taxes, somehow hidden as income taxes, corporate taxes. Basically half of the prices that we have as we speak in our taxes. The value-added tax would make that transparent. So at a state quota of 50%, then of this 1,000 sustenance minimum that we need would contain 500 euros. And therefore, in order to have a basic income that at least is compensating for the tax that we pay when we have our 1,000 euros consumption, then we would have to have a basic income of at least 500 euros, which in this scenario wouldn't cover the living costs, but we could say if we exempt a higher amount, cultural experience, etc., then we start reaching a level of basic income that allows us to live more comfortably on this. Shortly after my PhD thesis, also the DEV came out. Patrick Bach, I think was his name, was suggesting that if we, create one equal tax, value-added tax, and just pay it out per capita, the addition. So in our current taxation system, in order to make the minimum amount tax exempt, also a value-added tax exempt, we would need to pay already 60 euros today on a monthly basis. So that was one suggestion alongside with my PhD thesis. And now we come to the final slide where we calculated, or I calculated, what it would cost to introduce a basic income, depending on whether it should be 800 or 900 or 1,000 euros, what it would cost, what the public costs of that would be. Usually when I'm giving this speech, this talk publicly, I have a more generic graph, but this is kind of the actual graph from the PhD thesis. And the main thing to understand that a basic income costs us net, so to speak, only about 20 billion euros, which of course is a large amount of money, but compared to other expenses is not. Is because we think the basic income to be a substitutive one, not an additive one. So when people have the luxury to have the time to think about and the inspiration to think about the basic income for the first time in their lives, what usually happens is they think everything else stays the same, and then they get the basic income on top, everybody gets it, because that's what we promote, that everybody gets it, and most people think, it's on top. So if it's on top, then the costs would be much higher. But our idea was and is that it is growing into the existing income system. Either transfer incomes are replaced to the extent of the basic income, and it grows also into the regular wage income system, of course, by means of a basic income law that would then allow, for instance, an employer to reduce the wage in a way that it is replaced by the basic income. So, but these, now we already start to get into the details. So if we think the basic income not in an additive way on top, but by virtue of its name, the basic income in a substitutive way, then we can see that it would cost us 10 years ago about 20 billion euros to introduce, I think, a basic income of 900 euros it was at that time. And the graph that you see here basically represents the income situation in Germany at that time. It's based on an idea by, I think, sociologist Jan Penn. That's Penn's parade. If we imagine that every human, every member in an economy is as high as her or his income, and if we are sitting in a stadium and the entire economy walks in, then we would have first, the part of the poorest of the poor, then the middle, and then at the end the giants, income giants. And we have turned this around to make it more intuitive. So the poorest of the poor are here on the left side, the wealthiest on the right side. And if you think the basic income in a substitutive way, then we would only have costs for those who today have an income below what we propose the basic income today, what we propose the basic income to be. So that would be the delta, which you see at the lower left side, the Zwickel as we called it, but delta is the more technical term that would be finance, and that leads to about 20 billion euros. And that can be raised by increasing the value-added tax by 1 or 2 percentage points, and then starting to pay that out, which would basically also to, before I conclude, I don't know how many minutes I have spoken already, but I think we are through with the slides, so we'll conclude in a moment. This kind of brings us into our reality today. We have the German Secretary of Finance who says, we can do our measures only. Okay. I see somebody has written something. We can maybe talk about that in a moment. Christian Lindner is quoted saying, our measures, Entlastungspaket, can only, buffer our problems, the problems for the people only once. And on an almost anecdotal evidence, I would say if the buffer for his Porsche would buffer only one bump, this buffer would not be really effective. In other words, what we need is a continuous buffer, and this continuous buffer can start relatively slow. We could start introducing the basic income next month, maybe starting with 10 euros per month, increasing by 1 percentage point the value-added tax, and that can then grow over the next 10, 15 years into what we want it to be. But now it's already maybe getting too technical. I thank you for your attention, looking forward to any questions that may arise. I see Damon has already posted something. I'm not sure if these are questions, but we can talk about them then in detail. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, André. So we have a little time now, and there's that question. And I will read that question for you, and then maybe I think it's a question to you, André. Mm-hmm. Nature is not there for free, and the bill for its exploitation is climate change.
Yeah, exactly.
Ecological collapse and extinction.
Yeah.
How do you integrate this into your model and address it?
Oh, wonderful.
Second,
No.
André, please wait. Please
No.
wait. Please let me read that. Please let me read that first.
But it's another question, Enno. I would like to answer the first question first.
Okay, then do that.
I'm very grateful for this question because this is a typical question arriving at this point. Nature is for free, as you know, we can generically learn by God. We don't experience God sending a bill for water and the sun. I still quote Götz Werner on that because it's very generically true. However, you're also, of course, right. If we destroy nature, renaturating it costs money. And if we destroy nature in a way that it cannot regenerate itself, then this costs money because the human beings involved repairing it costs money. So the consequences are severe, as we see every day, more and more. And I'm very grateful for this question because we have been also asking this question 13 years ago, and we came up with a system that then extended, and I'm probably talking about this at the end of next month at Freebis, that extended into kind of a side project. We calculated the universal basic income and how it can be financed for Germany. But we found, and still the case today, technically nobody needs to die today because of poverty in Germany. On a global frame, that is completely different. We have about 50,000 people dying prematurely, so 50,000 children dying every day because they do not have access to clean water and sufficient food. And that is not because we don't have enough clean water or sufficient food on this planet. We do. So we found that the reason they do not have access is they do not have the income. So that is why we promoted the following idea, and that leads into the partial answer to your wonderful question. We suggested and still suggest, but since Götz Werner closed down the institute, I can't promote it, but that's why I'm so grateful that we can do it now today with Freebis in Freiburg. What we suggest is to auction off emission rights globally. That would yield about, if we auction off 50 gigatons at a starting price of 20 euros or US dollars, that would yield about 1 trillion US dollars or euros. And if you redistribute that per capita, then each and every individual on this planet would have 12 to 13 US dollars or euros income. Can be done with a microcredit system today, even with micropayments, maybe blockchain based, etc. But that's already too detailed. So our idea was we have a 3-level model: cap, auction, and dividend. So the short answer, I'm sorry, is we only auction off the amount that nature can reproduce itself, and that secures that nature is not being destroyed. That's the cap part. The second is the economic part, the auctioning, that makes sure that the resources go where people have the highest willingness to pay. And the third part is the equivalence part. So whatever is collected in this auctioning process is paid out per capita. And as I said, that would yield to, in the example of our atmosphere, we can do this basically for every natural resource, but we calculated it for the atmosphere because that's not distributed yet. That would yield 12 to 13 US dollars and would be an additional or basic payment, influx of money for paying a global basic income.
André, please, let's be brief and quick and short. We are at the end. I will read the two following parts of the question, and maybe we can have brief answers.
Okay.
So the second is, the capitalist does not make products for our benefit, but for profit. Thus, as a worker, I am exploited by being prevented from using my labor to meet my needs and instead forced into a minimal standard of living on that the capitalist is willing to provide. How does your model reflect and address this? Third part, if UBI is able to change this dynamic of exploitation, the powerful who control society will oppose it. How would you address this? So, can be a question to all of us. who wants to answer brief? Herr Neumärker.
Okay, I may try it because this was exactly on my last slide. That argument is exactly that when you can by a exit option, yes, organized by UBI for persons who don't have own capital or say inheritances and so on, for them they have the option to balance power, yeah, in organizing their labor contract, yeah, by arguing, I will exit if you don't give me a part of your profit or if you don't pay me higher, yeah, do not push me down to my old exit option under the workfare system, yeah, my new one is higher and I bargain with you now about your profit. This means in a firm, and that's very nearby by Götz Werner, your profit is my profit, yeah, and we balance it by giving you more self-determined work in the firm, and that's only possible with a UBI when you have a sufficient exit option. So by that way, I would say UBI solves at least the second question. And the third question is if UBI is able to change this dynamic of exploitation. Yeah, that's more or less the same answer. If the exit option, or Karl Wiederquist says, the power to say no, yeah, for me it's the power to say yes, I will bargain with you. I'm not suppressed by you designing the contract for me, and I can say only yes or no. I can say, please give me a little bit more. If not, I'm exiting. Then without capital, I have more or less the same bargaining power. And this will be self-enforcing in society. Why? Because my argument, and that's an argument, and that's the last argument I have, also from Götz Werner, is that the whole system here, he argues DM, I would argue the whole society will become then so productive because this worker hands in his intrinsic motivation that the share of profit also for the entrepreneur will increase. And by that way, both sides win from bilateral bargaining with a high exit option for the worker. And this has to be a participatory basic income.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please, all who have other questions, please be encouraged to reach out to us if we can't answer all the questions now. Or if you find, Damon, thank you for your question. If you find the answers unsatisfactory to some degree, please reach out so we can discuss later in the next days.
Thank you very much. So we at the end, now there is a General Assembly meeting for the members of the BN that has started a second ago. Thank you very much. And as André said, reach out to us if there are more questions. And I wish you a good night and a good day in Germany.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.